Hey, Lina, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Brittany, for having me.
Definitely. Where are you calling in from?
London, on a very typical London day, a little gray, a little rainy.
Classic. Right in the ordinary, right?
Yeah, exactly. This is our summer.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I lived in France in high school and that was the winter. I felt like I didn't see the sun for like 3 months.
Oh,
It was
gosh.
France is way more north than you'd think on the earth. So yeah, the winter was pretty dark.
Yeah, exactly. I was somewhere was I was reading somewhere that actually Paris gets so much rain. I mean, London is notorious as like the
Yeah.
place, or England is as the place that's super wet. But actually, Paris gets more rain than here because it
Yeah.
is actually quite far north.
Yes, crazy, crazy, crazy. Well, let's start with your background. Our listeners love to hear, where's our guest from? What did they study? Did they even go to school? Did they have a career before getting into women's health? So tell us about your story.
Yeah, so I come from a Chinese family, but I was born and raised in Brazil, and then I went to university in the U.S. actually. So I lived in the East Coast for a few years, kind of started my career there. So my first 10, 15 years actually I spent as an investor. So I was doing investing in Latin America and Europe. It was one of these investments actually that brought me to London.
Ah,
And I worked here for a few years and then went back to the US for my master's where I met my husband. And then we moved together to London. I fell in love with Europe and I was like, I want to spend at least a good amount of time in Europe. So we came here thinking we're going to be here for 5 years. And now it's been like 13 years later.
oh my God,
And
you're such a worldly woman. What a worldly woman. Really quickly with the investor thing, was that like a venture
yeah,
fund or private equity?
private equity. So I was at JP Morgan and then at Credit Suisse private equity group. So it was, but when I first started working at JP, it was during the first tech boom. So kind of the first internet boom. So even though it was private equity, we were looking at kind of early stage, very techy businesses. And then the bust happened. So I started looking at extremely late stage nuts and bolts businesses. And kind of technology didn't really come back into my radar, or I didn't really expect that. But my husband, he is a tech entrepreneur, and he's been doing tech ever since we graduated from business school. And the way I came about Parla and working in Femtech was very much from a personal standpoint. I think I'm one of a wave of women who didn't really think about having children until after I was 35, and kind of very naively thinking it was going to be something that was easy, and it was probably the hardest thing I've ever gone through. And I'm kind of very personality A type, where I'm kind of coded in a way to think, okay, if I work hard at something, I can get it, or there's a
Whoa.
plan and you'll prepare and stuff. And
Wait. We can't just force this thing to happen, because then I might be screwed, because that's exactly how I think. Well, just go harder,
oh god,
sleep
yeah, I
less,
know.
you know?
But it's kind of not quite how it worked. And it was I mean, the personality type came in handy at times, but it was hard for us because conceiving initially wasn't that hard, but then I had multiple pregnancy losses, and I didn't even know about pregnancy loss until I had them, and I was in all of that. So it took us about 4 years to then conceive our first live daughter, and then she was super premature, so we spent a ton of time in the NICU. Kind of, it was her first month or more of her life was spent at the NICU. So you can imagine, like, this, from kind of having a life where I kind of thought, okay, effort, output, everything seemed
Yeah.
to be quite not easy, but somewhat controlled.
Yep.
I went through 5 years of my life that changed me physically, emotionally, and honestly, it was pivotal for even my career now, right? So when we came out of all that, because I was in no mental state to start any new businesses during that, my husband, who's kind of a techie, and me having kind of been a little bit like a bulldog, really trying to figure things out about women's health and how I could improve my health, and why were things going wrong and all that. he said, like, I can't understand like why technology hasn't made it easier for women to understand their bodies better, or just figure out how to get the right support, like reduce the cost, like because we kept just facing so many challenges. Like we didn't know who to talk to, we didn't know the type of support we needed to, and then when we did find it, it was so expensive, you know, and we were extremely lucky to even be able to afford it or have some of it covered by insurance. But I'd say that the majority of people don't have that access. So it's such a kind of a very unfortunate place to be, and such an emotional time that you really want to democratize all of that. Like we shouldn't really be having those kinds of barriers in this day and age. So that was kind of the very early stages of Parla. You know, our mission was really to improve access to women and their partners, so that entire journey can be a lot clearer, a lot easier, and a lot more supportive. Yeah, and I quit my job and I started it.
My goodness. So how thank you, by the way, for sharing your story so authentically and vulnerably. How long ago was this that, you know, you finally had your baby and your husband started to be like, this was crazy? How long ago was that?
So it's 2017. I left my job in January, and I was at the time 7 months pregnant with my second daughter. And it was kind of these like random serendipities. And he saw this one program on Google, and he said it was a program. It was a 3-month program for mothers in tech. So you could bring your baby to the program. Yeah, and it was basically a program where you'd meet every week, and you'd meet with different mentors, and the idea was to help you build your business plan. And he's like, you have to apply to this. And the deadline for that application was the day that I was due to go in for my C-sections. I was like, okay, I'm doing this. So we applied. Yeah, so we applied to that, and I got into that.
Like,
and you know,
girl, hold on, I got to finish my application.
Yeah, exactly. Like submit before I go into the hospital. And I got in, and this program started when she was 8 weeks old. So she was like this little tiny baby that was on me, and I'd like commute across London. But it was wonderful, and I met a ton of other women in similar situations. They were an amazing program where each week you'd meet with a coach, and you'd figure out different parts of your business. So one day would be strategy, the other one would be marketing, the other one would be like financial modeling, etc. So out of that 3-month program, I had kind of a robust business plan. And then it was quite serendipitous. And then I got into an accelerator program here in London, which was focused all around building businesses to help tackle women's and girls' emotional and mental health. And a big part of our product is mental health, is kind of really empowering you to feel better during this phase that can be very difficult for anybody who's struggling with fertility or pregnancy loss. So we got into that, and that was a 9-month accelerator program. And then we got our first round of funding at the end of that, which was in 2018. But yeah, it was nuts, but it was very serendipitous. Yeah.
Well, that's oftentimes the universe telling you need to do it, when it's almost
right.
Like I have almost no choice but to do it. It's so lined up. It's like crazy perfect. Like this doesn't happen by mistake. So I can totally appreciate that. One question before we get into what is Parla, 2017, give or take, you said, where was the tech, right? Where was the things that help you figure out where to find that doctor, or what to do, or what questions to ask, or how to even finance it? I feel like every day I see new fertility, like apps and stuff. And so did these apps come out recently, or were they around when you were there, but it was just not together enough? I'm just trying to understand, what was the landscape like in 2017 for fertility stuff?
Yeah, for me, it was the holisticness of it. It was, so you'd have companies that just did testing. And it was, I think 2018 was when modern fertility in the US kind of was really big about fertility testing. And I think they're probably, them and Maven were probably kind of the spearheading companies of building something really women-centric. So here in the UK, we were probably a few years earlier where there was quite a lot of content companies around post-pregnancy, pregnancy, post-pregnancy. There was a lot of IVF clinics, IVF stuff, all kind of during the but I really felt like there was a gap in kind of tying all the things together, and especially bringing in emotional health and mental health. And because for me, you can't really be healthy if you don't really think of your physical as well as your mental health. I think it's something that's very, very, very connected. So our vision for Parla was to really bring that together. So you help women understand what's going on physically, but you're really supporting them with that emotional health through and through. So it was something very core to us. So kind of incorporating all of that was quite key.
Have you always been an advocate for emotional and mental health to the extent that you are now, or did you have to go through your experience with, pregnancy in order to realize how important it was?
I don't think I was so acutely aware until I went through what I went through.
Got it. Well, let's get into Parla. So what is Parla?
So we're a expert-led community. I really think that, because another thing that really kind of drove me crazy was Dr. Google. You get one problem and you go to Dr. Google and that problem just blows up, right? So for me, getting the right, exactly. I'm going to die tomorrow. It's getting the right expert to help you is really, really important. So for us, all the content is written by experts. We run courses, which is led by experts. So we run PCOS courses, post-pregnancy, pregnancy loss support courses, and those are all led by somebody who's really, really knowledgeable about that phase. And what we do is we curate that course for you, or that kind of relationship for you. So for example, we run a PCOS program where it starts with a PCOS hormone test so that you really know what kind of PCOS do you have. You then work with Lina, who's an amazing, she's a nutritionist, so she helps look at all your lifestyle. What are things that you need to change in your lifestyle to help you? And then you can also chat with fertility nurses in case you really want to kind of explore, do I need medication or do I not need medication? So it kind of curates all of that. So you only have to go to one place to get that support, from the testing to answering your questions, looking at medicine, as well as looking at more holistic approaches to improving your symptoms. And we do that for different challenges that women have. So we do that for PCOS, endometriosis, if you're exploring IVF, if you just had a pregnancy loss, and different, like the pregnancy loss, for example, is one that I'm obviously very passionate about. That one, the program is run by a clinical psychologist, because that for us was a more relevant expert for you to be connecting than necessarily a doctor. Because what you're really kind of trying to untangle is all that grief and all the fear that comes around after if you get pregnant again. So we kind of, because of the experience and the women that we've worked with and the user feedback, we try to get the right expert for these different journeys.
Does Parla offer telehealth? Would you consider this telehealth?
It's no, because it's usually wrapped into programs, so that you get a bit more. But the experts during this program, they're on text message, so you can through our app. But so Lina runs the PCOS program over the course of 6 to 7 weeks, but she can answer questions throughout the entire program during those 7 weeks. And most of the time, people continue that relationship on the app with the experts that they work with.
Cool. And who reviews their test results with them? Because I know that's
the experts.
Experts?
Yeah, the experts. Yeah, exactly. So they receive a report, but then they have that chat with the person who's doing the program with them.
Amazing. Well, so how do you include mental and emotional health? You mentioned that the, pregnancy loss is led by a clinical psychologist, but what about, how is it integrated otherwise?
We have a lot of content. So we have meditations, and they're kind of very specific meditations for different programs. We have journaling. And again, it's curated. So the pregnancy loss program, for example, that we just did, users that are in that program, they get very specific prompts. So they do journaling, they bring that to the sessions. They can also listen to meditations. We run events also. I mean, now with COVID it's a little harder, but I'm hoping that soon we can do some live events. So we've kind of done that through Zoom. So we try to integrate that awareness and then upskill people with things that work for them. Like not everybody will connect with meditation, not everybody will connect with journaling, but we kind of make it aware and make the tools easy for them to access. And then most often than not, they'll engage with it.
Is there any science behind like that somebody has shown like meditation and journaling and mindfulness exercises would be helpful for your fertility? I mean, it's
yes,
like, obviously it should, right? Like
yeah.
the more you're in your body, the more balanced you are. But I'm just wondering if there's actually science written about it.
Yeah, so we've actually, so this the pregnancy loss program that we just finished designing, we worked with a researcher from Cambridge. So we really want to make things as science-based as possible. So it was kind of a 4 or 5 part research project. We're still kind of finishing it. But the first project was literally doing kind of a really big survey of all clinical trials that had taken place and all different trials that they had looked at for women who were doing IVF, women who have had pregnancy loss, and what helps them cope best with kind of their emotional well-being throughout these. And I can probably send you later a list of a lot of these researchers, but there are some things that have shown to help, but it can be quite like more scans helps reduce your anxiety, more doctor visits but those are they're very expensive and they're very hard to kind of impose on a medical system to be able to deliver that. But there are also a lot of skills that you can help people to develop that makes them a bigger agent in kind of their health journey. And a lot of those come down to techniques like peer support, being mindfulness, and mindfulness is a word that has been overused to people just thinking of it as you sitting there meditating. But mindfulness is being aware of the thoughts that you're having, kind of being present, and that kind of negative chatter that you can have, the self-critic that you can have, that can really have a very negative impact on you. So there was a big study that happened here in the UK that literally just had women do some journaling about how they felt, how grateful they felt about some things, or helping them reframe some thoughts. And then they went to show over a number of weeks how their markers improved. And we've even done that in our app. So we actually are very science-based, and we, through the learnings of these trials, and then us doing it on our own product, and then following the women and having pop-ups tracking how they're feeling, we continually curate and tweak the product so that it can really be delivering things that are helpful.
Yeah. How many women have used your product in your program?
We have more than 8,000, and we're in 80 countries. So it's 80 countries, but I'd say probably kind of 80% are in a lot of the Anglo-speaking ones. So US, UK, Canada, Singapore, Australia is kind of our biggest markets. But for me, that, and it's all been organic. We've never done kind of crazy marketing. And it's for me, it's just a sign of the need. It's something that people are looking for.
Yeah. How common is pregnancy loss?
1 in 4. It's the leading pregnancy complication, and that for me is like, it's a mission that we have, is to just really demystify this. It's so common, but
yeah, tell me more. We talk about infertility a lot, but I don't think we talk enough about pregnancy loss.
No. Yeah, so 1 in 4 pregnancies will end in loss. So a lot of them early stage, so a lot of them before 12 weeks, but also many late stage. And a recent study have shown that 70% of women that experience pregnancy loss go on to develop symptoms of PTSD. So you can imagine that has such a profound impact on you, how you function, how you're at work, how you're with relationships. And the problem is that because so many of the pregnancy losses happen in the first 12 weeks, and a lot of women are told not to share that, they're cut off from a lot of the support, the kind of like the natural support system that they would have, right? So you're telling somebody that you've had a pregnancy loss when they didn't even know that you were pregnant. Or there's this kind of like very bizarre way that our society is structured, where you're told not to share that you're pregnant until you're after 12 weeks, because so much of the pregnancy loss happens then, which is actually then, intuitively you'd think, okay, so it's very common. But then the health system doesn't really screen for that. So for example, even though it's shown that it can have such a high mental impact, nobody gets offered mental health screening or mental health support after that. And here in the UK, you're expected to miscarry 3 times before you even get any investigation. So you imagine that impact on any women. It's insane, yeah. And I actually think that it's a massive market gap in care for women. I think a lot of people are focused on fertility, infertility, and I don't think of pregnancy loss just as miscarrying in the first 12 weeks. I think women connect with IVF and like not implanting or a cycle not working in a very similar way. Like the way that you experience it, that you think of your embryos is very, very similar. So the emotional burden that they go through when they're in IVF is very high. And if you look at the trends, right, everybody, like most of the women, the highest category of women trying to conceive are those above 40. Like there are 50% chance of miscarrying if you're above 40. Not even, so it's not 1 in 4, but one in yeah, it's like 50%. The rates of IVF not working it's almost 75%, right? So we need to start paying attention to the fact that there is a large group of women that will be experiencing emotional distress. It doesn't have to be as far as PTSD, but you're not functioning at your best. You're not well. That's not healthy. And we need to think more about how we can close that gap for them. Like we shouldn't be. It's kind of, for the longest time, we've been told to deal with our period pains. Like we shouldn't be told to just get over it. Like you shouldn't just get over your miscarriage. You shouldn't just get over the fact that you're having failed IVF. Like we need to start recognizing that has an impact on how you feel and how you will function in society, with your family, with your friends, with yourself, right? And that for me is part of health.
My gosh, so powerful. This is so important. So I have some more specific questions, like technical questions. And this is honestly, my listeners know that I'm a student on my own podcast. I'm like learning a lot. So if women are experiencing pregnancy loss, are they kind of categorized into like they're experiencing infertility, or is it a whole separate category?
It's so a lot of women, or not a lot. So some women might have recurrent miscarriage. So they are able to conceive, but they can't hold on to that pregnancy. And you might be experiencing recurrent miscarriage for more than 12 months, right? So for me, I think that is part of infertility. You're not conceiving. There's something you need to figure out. Why is it that you're not able to hold on to that pregnancy? I think sometimes, and that is what often frustrates a lot of women, is that they'll go to the doctor and the doctor will fob them off like, oh, you at least got pregnant. Just go and try again. Do you see what I mean? And that again is so mentally jarring, right? So, and a lot of women will miscarry because of IVF. So they've already been trying for a very long time. They might be trying for 2, 3, 4 years, and then they go into IVF and they have multiple cycles that fail or that they'll have a miscarriage. So that again is infertility. So I think it goes hand in hand. It's very it's case by case, but I think more often than not, we need to be thinking about the miscarriage in the bigger context of how long that person has been trying.
Yep. And then what does like losing a pregnancy look like? Does it look like the woman gets her period, like a really bad period, or what does that look like? Since we don't talk about it, I'm like, I don't even know.
Yeah,
You know?
it happens very differently for different women. Like they're very silent miscarriages where women can literally they'll go to a scan and they can't find a heartbeat. But you won't have felt pain, you won't have felt bleeding. Eventually, your body will start the process of terminating the pregnancy. So at some point, the waters will break, and it also depends on the gestation. You might start bleeding, you might start feeling very sharp pains. It's kind of later stage miscarriage, like your waters might break. So it is quite varied from women to women.
Wow, this is like super crazy and like super informative. I can't believe this is like, we're over 100 episodes. We really haven't talked about pregnancy loss. I mean, it speaks to, even within Femtech, we have, not that we have biases, but we tend to, even ourselves, continue to talk about things that are like endometriosis or, whatever, infertility, IVF. And then, it's like, for me, I'm always trying to talk more about abortion because it's so common.
Mm-hmm.
But now I'm going to make sure I also talk about pregnancy loss because it sounds like really the rates of it happening are kind of the same.
Yeah, well, and I think, abortion is another interesting one where we also think of it as pregnancy loss, because you will go through that grief, right? And you will go through that guilt. And there are very similar feelings that you have to untangle, not talk. Exactly. And, for me, I kind of wrap a lot of these themes under taboo subjects. I think that we still have a lot of taboo subjects around women's health. And I think we need to start breaking them. And I think abortion, pregnancy loss, infertility, all those fall within kind of taboos, right? Which just makes it harder for you to learn about it.
The whole concept of not telling people you're pregnant until after you're 12 weeks in, do you think that was like societal, or like, do we even know the history of that? Like, was there a time when
I should figure out when that became the thing. That's such a very good question. I'll go back. I'm sure.
Yeah. So,
But it is probably, the history probably is because 80% of miscarriages will happen in the first 12 weeks. So, so people won't, or the doctor community will probably put that as a marker. Like there are always different markers of when the rates of miscarriage, the risk of miscarriages drop quite a bit. So if you detect a heartbeat at week 7, there's a much higher likelihood that it won't miscarry. And if you get to past 12 weeks, which is when kind of a lot of the basic organs are all formed, the rate declines even more after 12. So there's kind of like a science to it in a way. So it probably stems from some of that. But I think the kind of shame of don't tell anybody, or that fear around it is very cultural, is very societal, and it doesn't really actually help us, because it really strips you from your support system. It really, really does. Like you're being told to hide something, which the risks are quite high during that time. So why already make somebody feel ashamed to it? And then and then I think also, like, some women will miscarry late, so having that safe, quote unquote, safe pregnancy is sometimes it's not relevant in a way, right? Because you could lose your baby late too.
Gosh, it's like, if you had to put a narrative on society, it's like, dear woman, you're going to you have the high chance of experiencing something super traumatic and terrible. Keep it to yourself. Don't bother.
I know, yeah, exactly.
It's like,
it's bonkers, yeah. I know.
Wow. Well, this has been such a great conversation. I have 2 last questions for you that our listeners really love. The first one is, we have a lot of aspiring Femtech founders, which I love. We're growing the next wave of innovators. What's an area in women's health and wellness that you think still needs innovating?
Well, I'm obviously very passionate about pregnancy loss and kind of the early pregnancy stage. But I almost would say that if you're trying to start a business, pick something you're passionate about. Even if it's something that is common and people have been doing a lot. There's just you put so much sweat, love, and tears into your business that for me, what's more relevant is find what you're really passionate about that will keep you awake and excited about it, rather than trying to figure out, okay, where's the main gap, and may potentially even working on something that's not really kind of super passionate. So
yes, I love that advice. I don't think anyone's ever given that advice, actually. So
well, really,
like do whatever the hell you want. Do you experience people telling you that this is a solved thing and you shouldn't start Parla? Do you relate to that?
I didn't have anybody tell me that it wasn't a problem worth exploring, because I think everybody, or at least the investors that we rallied around the business, all recognized that women's health was something that required disruption and it required improvement. But I did probably have a lot of people try to pull me into different directions, going, oh, the infertility market is so big, the IVF market is so big. And so I had to fight some of that, because for me, it's like, yeah, it's big, but it's really crowded, but nobody's looking at this part. And, like nobody's looking at mental health. Nobody's looking at an integrated approach. Nobody's looking at pregnancy loss. And now, you see, I don't know how the conversation is as much in the US, but here you're seeing some very large corporates. Well, New Zealand is a perfect example, right? So the prime minister now she's recognized pregnancy loss, and she gives, it's now part of a paid leave. So here you've had Channel 4, which is a really big channel. You've had Monzo, which is a fintech company. You had Lidl, which is a large kind of supermarket chain. They've all recognized, and they do paid leave for pregnancy loss. So for me, it's you're starting to see that movement. You're starting to see that it is an area of health that people are starting to look at. Is not just this kind of thing that people don't want to talk about. I mean, you see, LV was they innovated breast pumps. I mean, when was the last time that you ever looked at breast pumps? So I think you're starting to see that. You're starting to find areas where people felt like it was too taboo or to talk about, and you're starting to see innovation.
Yeah, well, we got to keep the movement going. Our last question is, what do you think the femtech industry as a whole needs the most right now in order to be successful?
Investors and founders, like female founders. I think, I mean, it's shocking, the statistics. It's still only 2% of capital that go to women. I think the majority of femtech businesses are still led by women, because we really understand the problem. And we need more investors who recognizes women are 50% of the population. We are we make 60-70% of the health choices. Like, we are a market that you need to take care of, and think about. And that goes hand in hand for me with research. I think a lot of the times women's health has always been muddled together with averages, and we are a very different body. Our hormones are very different. The way we react to things are very different, and we need to start closing that research gap. And I think femtech really helps that, right? So so the example I was giving you about how we got funding to run this pregnancy loss program, and we really kind of did a lot of greenfield research on the emotional health side of it. Is part of that. Is kind of really starting to do new studies that highlight the user need that women have. I think that's a massive gap that we need to start closing.
Do you know if the rates of pregnancy loss are increasing because women are having kids later in life?
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
So, my understanding is that most of our research on pregnancy, child, labor of it, all of it is based on like 1970s research with like 10 white girls in their early 20s. And it's just like, yeah, the vaginas that are birthing babies today are not, and they're not all white. They're not all 20 years old. Like, they're not all purely healthy, right? We're all different. And so,
yeah, 100%. Yeah, absolutely. Because I think there's a gap in gender. There's a gender gap in research, and there's also a diversity gap in research. I mean, the rates of death, maternal death, pregnancy complications are so much higher in minority groups, and it's just not fair. And even kind of, for us, when we launch our programs and we try to reach our users and community, we really have to be very thoughtful about how to reach smaller communities, how to make sure that we can bring that support to them, because it still isn't the traditional channels. But I think at the same time, I'm very hopeful for tech, because I think tech can bridge that gap. It can get to and even kind of on a global basis, there are countries that you're more likely to have a mobile phone than a refrigerator, right? So there are situations like that. So the mobile phone and tech and internet hopefully can also democratize that.
Yes. Oh, I love it. Lina, this has been such a great conversation. Thank you so much for your time today.
No, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to hear when it goes live, and we'll share it with our community and all that.